Hello, everybody. Welcome to our inaugural OUSSG podcast. Today, we are speaking with Ambassador Christian Dussey, who is the director of the Geneva Center for Security Policy. Prior to this, he served as the Swiss ambassador and head of Crisis Management Center of the Swiss Federal Department of Foreign Affairs, which coordinates the government response teams and crises that affect Swiss citizens abroad. Before this, he served as a fellow at Harvard University, and today he will be speaking to us about leading and navigating in a fast-moving and turbulent world. Ambassador Dussey, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Matthew. It's a great pleasure for me to be with you today and to be for this the first one on this inaugural format for you. As you said, Matthew, before, we live in a very interconnected world, which is marked by ongoing and far-reaching transformation. And we can see even now with the coronavirus pandemic. The changes are gradual, they're also abrupt, and they affect all of us on different levels and in multiple spheres. What I'm going to do now is to look at 6 characteristics that I believe are important to really understand where we are, and it will affect have implication on organizations, institutions, and individual. So I'm going to share with you my slides in a second. Here. And here, what we see now with COVID-19, the virus will serve as a powerful accelerator for a lot of the issues I'm going to mention. The first of these characteristics is the convergence. The convergence of 3 features: the complexity of system and issues, the interdependence, and the speed. And we see now a large array of new actors. And so we have a multiplicity of actors in the world, from NGOs to states to international organizations, multinational companies, and so on, that really express how the world is today. But within this interdependence and complexity that we also see now in supply chain, in for us in the difficulty sometimes to have the right medicine at the right time because of the spread of the production site all over the world, what we see more and more, we see a weaponization of interdependence through unilateral sanctions, but also trade wars. So this is the first characteristic of the world, the convergence of complexity, of interdependence, and speed. The second characteristics is the relates to the geopolitical and security threats and challenges. What we observe now, we observe a power shift, fragmentation, receding globalization, protectionism, nationalism, authoritarianism, extremism, and so on. And here it's important also to distinguish between what we consider as security threats versus security challenges, which each of them will need differentiated policy responses. And we have new issues and traditional issues. A lot of focus on climate change, but still conflict remains. We have migration, we have pandemics, and soon, and as yet, as we talk, economic and financial crisis. Now, what is interesting here to do is just to examine, for example, if we take the global risk analysis done by the World Economic Forum, they do it every year. And if you look at the top 5 global risk in terms of likelihood or in terms of impact from 2008 until 2018, what we see, and the World Economic Forum has been analyzing 5 types of issues: the economic, the environment, the geopolitical, the societal, and the technological. And so if we look at them, we see that from 2008 and 2010, the years, the economic risks were at the forefront, and then receded completely. And the year from 2015 to until 2018, the chances that we have environmental or geopolitical risks much were perceived to be much higher than before. Interesting in looking at this risk is the risk of pandemic or chronic disease. And they were mentioned as top risk only in 2008 9, and 10. And afterwards, they totally disappeared of all the 5 global risks. So it's interesting to see that we have moved from economic risk perceived as the main in terms of likelihood and impact at the beginning of 2008, receding, and now probably as a main risk as we move forward. But the pandemic was totally out of the radar screen for many years because we focused on other risks. So this is the first, the second characteristic, the geopolitical and security threats and challenges. If we go now to the third one, what we see that we have enormous vulnerabilities in our societies, whether at the individual level, at the organizational level, whether it's as a society through critical infrastructures. And as we have seen in the recent weeks, the importance of taking care of all our nationals abroad. The large repatriation that has been done in the past months for many countries was probably unprecedented in history. What we see that with these vulnerabilities, we see that through massive shocks, whether cyber attacks or others, we can be extremely weak and vulnerable. So this is the main also characteristics of the world we live in. The fourth one is the unpredictability. May I suggest here a simple exercise that I do with the participants as GCSP often is that let's review the cover page of The Economist over the past 3 years, just the cover page. And how many issues represented in the cover page were expected, even just a few months before the publications. The conclusion? Very few. So in other words, the future is not a straight line that will evolve in a linear manner. There will be changes and surprises, wildcards, good and bad. And so what we observe is that the unexpected is a common thread throughout history. And at the beginning of each year, the media try to predict the year ahead. And so if we take the example of 2014, let's say large media have done that almost every year. Nobody expected in 2014 that Russia will invade Ukraine or that Daesh will conquer large part of Iraq or Syria. The same for 2015. Who predicted that more than 1 million refugees will enter Western Europe? And who predicted the electoral victory of Donald Trump? So looking back and learning from history is critical because trends, directions, or implications, interlockings also are recurring in history. And so the lesson here is that history knows only one single law or principle, the law of surprises. And as now history accelerates through the unprecedented advances in technology, we'll see probably that strategic surprises will also be more frequent as we move ahead and more frequent as before. So for us, the lessons here is to be able to analyze the past and history in order to understand the present and imagine the future so that we can prepare ourselves, try to avoid or encourage it, and seize opportunities. If I go further on the fifth characteristic, what we have is that the impact of exponential technology. What we see here is we see a spectacular advances in several fields, such as artificial intelligence, synthetic biology, neuroscience, or quantum computing. These are spectacular acceleration for the good and sometimes for the bad. But this progress is exponential, whereas human beings are still looking at responses in a linear manner. And this gap will have to be taken care or we will have more issues and challenges ahead. The sixth characteristics of the current world is the power of emotions. If we see how social media has amplified the message, amplified events. This is quite unprecedented in history. It has been boosted by a series of platform, social media platform, and others, but also through TV series. And TV series has a spectacular also impact on politics, and from politics they have also an impact on the public in the audience watching these TV series. And here, two interesting comments on this topic is that there is, in early 2018, Jaron Lanier, who is considered to be the founding father of virtual reality, said during a TED conference that we shouldn't call companies like Facebook and social networks, but we should call them behavior modification empires. The impact on the way we do politics, on the way we communicate with each other, is tremendous, and also the victim sometimes of disinformation. Here, I recommend, if you're interested, a book by a French analyst, Dominique Moisy, who is called The Geopolitics of TV Series, or The Triumph of Fear. An interesting way of how the audiences watching the movies, watching the series, will influence politicians, and also how politicians has been influenced by the TV series. An interesting book, if you want to read it, called The Geopolitics of TV Series by Dominique Moisy. As we move ahead and we look at these five characteristics of the world we are living in, all of these characteristics now will be accelerated by the impact of the pandemics, the impact of coronavirus. So what does it mean for us? What does it mean for us as organizations, institutions, and individuals? I will look at five consequences of what we are and what we need to do. First, we need to better understand the environment we are in, to better understand our neighbors, our partners, adversaries, or new actors. We need to better understand their culture, history, worldviews, the way they take decisions, to know their interests, and this will affect all of us, organization and individuals. Let me here take two examples. If we look at what is needed to be a successful diplomat now in the years ahead, first, you need to have the diplomatic tradecraft, the skills, understanding history, understanding the tools that you need to be a successful diplomat. This is part of the tradecraft you will need. The second, you have to master technology. Before, when you have multilateral meetings, you have groups, large delegation, it was difficult to coordinate even your own delegation. Now through WhatsApp, for example, all the social media platform, you coordinate, you exchange ideas, you exchange opinions or progress in one field or the other through technology. So mastering technology is key, especially now when we're through confinement, also semi-confinement, where we cannot attend physically conferences, but we still have to deal with a lot of issues that affect all of us. And the third point is to understand the environment, understand the country you're in, understand the instruments, understand how private companies, multinational companies work, what are their interests, their decision-making process, and how NGOs are working, how international organizations are working. For a diplomat, how the military is developing its strategy, and so on. If we look now, what does it mean for the CEO of a private company? It's the same. You will have the business skills that you will learn in business schools and so on. Then you will have to master the technology. Digitalization is going to transform the way the companies are run, what kind of service they deliver. But also you have to be in an environment where you understand the market, you understand regulator, you understand the way of working of the EU, or you understand the way of working of non-profit NGOs that will affect the way you operate, whether it's in a stable environment or in fragile context. So this is the way for us to look and understand where we're living. And here to tell you element that's relating to the understanding of environment that I believe is important is that to go back to the memoir of Robert McNamara, who was the Secretary of Defense of the United States during the Cuban crisis. And in 1989, a lot of former officials from the US, from Cuba, from USSR, they met and then look at what happened and what were the risks during the Cuban crisis. And what McNamara said, and I quote him, he said, "Some of us believe that the United States faced a great danger during the Cuban Missile Crisis of October 1962. Now, in examining the documents of the three nations involved, USA, Cuba, USSR, in the late 80s and early 90s, we learned that we had greatly underestimated that danger. The decision of each of the three nations, immediately before and during the crisis, had been distorted by misinformation, miscalculation, and misjudgment. Crisis management is dangerous, difficult, and uncertain. It is also not possible to predict with confidence the consequences of military action. We must therefore focus our attention on crisis avoidance. What is interesting here is his focus on misinformation, miscalculation, and misjudgment. And so for us, all of us, organization and individual, focusing more on understanding your environment, your neighbor, your adversary, and your actor will be critical as we move ahead. The second point and the second implication or consequences is the need to increase our ability to anticipate, the ability also to adapt. And here, there is an interesting article written in 2015 by Klaus Schwab, the founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum. The title, the article is entitled The Age of Adaptation. And here he focused on three learnings. The first is the need to anticipate, the need to adapt, and the need to learn. And this is actually not new in the sense of what are the key element or the key feature as we move forward. Because in 1990, Professor Elliot Cohen from Johns Hopkins School at Johns Hopkins University wrote a book called Military Misfortunes, Failure in War. And so he analyzed all the conflict of the 20th century. And then he concluded that the main learning is that all of the conflicts were a failure of anticipation, failure of adaptation, and a failure of learning. So for all of us, important organization or individual to focus on our ability to anticipate, to adapt, and also the ability to learn better than before. If you look further here, there is an interesting book called The Team of Teams that was written by a former four-star US general, Stanley McChrystal. And this book is related to his experiences fighting Al-Qaeda in Iraq. For over years, they were trying to find the leader of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and they could not, even though they have the most lethal, the most sophisticated, the best equipped special force in the world. And they concluded that the model they used in the decision making throughout a very large organization was not successful. And so what they learned or they analyzed at the time is that speed, complexity, interdependence, as I mentioned before, is not suited, is difficult with this environment just to have an impactful organization to deal with difficult issues. So what we need now, we need more organizations that have a shared awareness of purpose throughout the organization, and also a delegated execution. So the adaptability, and this is what he called a team of teams. So we go from a traditional organizations where you have a top-down structure to a team of teams that is extremely spread out. It's a team of teams, networks of network that is constantly adapting itself and has a shared awareness. And this model is for organization to go from, and here I look at a studies done recently by McKinsey, and we're going from organization at machines, where you have a top-down hierarchy, a bureaucracy, you have silos, to an organization as organism, where you could have quick change and flexible resources, a leadership that shows direction, enable actions, team built around end-to-end accountability, and where boxes and lines are less important and to focus our actions. So this is something that is important for us to understand that the need for adaptability and anticipation is better. Only through that can we have the agility in order to be a best performers in this situation. Here, a small anecdote. When we look now at the large rules and regulations that are often produced by governments, just to look back and to examine the intent of the head of the operation Overlord, General Eisenhower, in June 1944, which is the largest military armada in world history. And his intent was summarized in only one page with 8 bullet points. So the need for simplicity, so that his intent, going from the United Kingdom to the Ruhr and to Berlin, was something that he wanted every unit, every individual to understand the purpose and the way and the broad direction of the operation. So I think to keep in mind, beside adaptation, adaptability, also the need for simplicity. And simplicity in crisis is probably also a force multiplier. I go now to the third consequences, the need for more imagination and creativity. If you look at the last page of the conclusion of the 9/11 Commission report, you will see that they notice a lack of imagination to prevent 9/11. The same happened after the Iraq invasion in 2003. To predict the future of the invasion, there was also a failure of imagination, as several high-level officials at the time in the US have said. So for me, my own experiences is when I was the head of the crisis center, I had to deal with hostage taking abroad. And when you look at these issues, you're here chairing inter-ministerial meeting, and you have a complex interagency process. You have the intelligence service, you have the military, you have the diplomats, you have the people working development aid, corporations, and everyone around the table comes from a different tribe, different way of analyzing problems, different way of looking at developing a strategy. Some of them are very structured, like the military, some others are less, and you have to combine everyone. So the interagency process is already complex. But for me, as a leader of and the chair of this group, the most difficult challenges was not how to coordinate and make everyone work efficiently and effectively. It was how can I transform this team in a team that is creative enough to find solutions when you have a situation that you have never experienced before. It could be a massive civil unrest in a country. It could be a hostage taking. It could be something that happens in complex situation. And so creativity is becoming one of the key words, not only for us in ministries or in government, where we even now have to face even large challenges with the coronavirus. But this is something also that is noted in surveys. I come back to a survey done by the World Economic Forum and the job report. And they say that in 2015, among the 10 or 12 main characteristics for the future, they said that creativity was the number 10. But they said that in 2020, creativity will be ranking number 3. So a more focus on creativity. And creativity is not something that you can say to the team, let's think out of the box. Probably never have a good idea just in giving these instructions. Creativity is nurtured by curiosity, and curiosity is a muscle. If you don't train your curiosity, you are not going to be able to perform correctly as when you are faced with difficult challenges. And this is what we do at the center at GCSP, is having different group of people. It's called the Global Fellowship Initiative, and this group of people are extremely diverse in their culture, in their nationalities, in the profession. We have artists sitting next to military officer, sitting next to diplomat, sitting next to close to politicians, or a fashion designer, or biological or molecular biologists, and bringing everyone together, every field together, and you let them collide. And this is where innovation happens, is the collision of these different cultures, nationalities, professions, and experiences. And this is something that has a huge success at the center, because we bring not only fellows from one type and one discipline, but from multi-disciplines. I go to the fourth consequences is the resiliency. There are no better example to see that where all we are now in this middle of this pandemic, to see the resiliency at the individual level. How do we cope individually to what's happening? The individually of the resilience of your team at work, the resilience of your organization, your company, your university, and also the resilience of the society. And so, in order to be resilient, I come back to my first point, which was understanding the environment. You have to really know your partners, whether your partner is a private company, whether your partner or your is member of governments or NGOs. All of us together, we have to understand our own decision making mechanism, where we come from, what is the history, what are the interests of each one, so that really we can create something that is better than the sum of all our capabilities. So resilience has been really put forward now because of coronavirus, but it's something that will still remain. If you see the number of cyber attack on the different systems that we are experiencing now in different countries, this is something that we'll have to look further. My last consequences, it's called learning agility. Most of us have a smartphone. If we don't update our smartphone regularly, either it's automatic or you do that manually, we'll run into trouble. We'll have security gaps. We'll have the impossibility to have an application work. So we do it. But the question for us to ask is, what was the last time that we have updated our main software, our brain? When was the last time we built our skill set, our tool set, and change our attitude in order to better be able to face the different challenge we are, all of us. Too often when I talk to different organizations in international Geneva, but also worldwide, people say, but we are too busy. And I answer them, you are too busy to learn. And when you are too busy to learn, or as General Matisse said, too busy to read, then it's like being on a bicycle. You have your head down, you go very fast, but you miss the turn coming in front of you. And this is dangerous. So the learning agility is something that we have to focus much more. And this is what we do at GCSP. Let me just say a few words about the Geneva Center for Security Policy to conclude. The center was created or is a byproduct, more correctly, of the Geneva Summit of November 1985 between President Reagan of the United States and Mikhail Gorbachev, the Secretary General of the USSR. So the center is co-located with a lot of organizations within the House of Peace, the Maison de la Paix in Geneva, where you have universities, we have NGOs, we had private foundations who are working on peace and security issues. And the center's mission, the GCSP mission, is to prepare and transform individuals, and organizations so that we can create a safer world. And we work here on several tracks. The several tracks we work on are first the executive education. We run more than 80 courses a year, half of them on domain or tailor-made for organizations, companies, NGOs. And more the courses are also run abroad. The second part of the center, we are a platform for diplomatic dialogue. We hold confidential track 1.5 diplomatic dialogue on Syria, on the Korean Peninsula, also on European security. And we have a lot of public events, and now we coronavirus, all our events and are virtual online, and probably more success than even before when we're only these physical meetings. Then we are also a platform, as I mentioned before, where we host people in transition. Diplomat between two postings, military officer coming from a field zone, head of an NGOs who want to transition to another position or to the private sector, politicians who are in between positions. They were ministers and now they are back as in parliament, and they want to use the resource of the center and what we do. And answered another part of what we do here with them is we've noticed that 10 or 15% of all the fellows, we have 30 fellows per month at our center, they want to create their own organization, a new NGO, a new foundation, and with them we help them incubate. We give the services like any other incubator so that we can create new organization, new NGOs. And now, for example, we have 5 foundations that are incubated at the center, and when they are mature enough, they will leave and be on their own outside of the center. Then the model of the center is a bit different than the others, since we don't have a large faculty, but we invite more than 1,000 guest speakers for all our courses, facilitations, and other workshops. And so with them, we run videocasts, podcasts in order to share what's happening, what are the issues, the developments. With a large alumni community that are closing now, we are close to 9,000 alumni all over the world. It goes from head of state to head of intelligence service, ministers, but also in private company, compliance officers, chief risk officer. And we build this community in order really to favor and to strengthen the personal contact between them, not towards us, but it's more like we're more like a hub, and we foster the different contacts and the work. For example, now a group led by our alumni hub in Kiev is running a global study on looking at the weak signals that we are not looking at now because we are focused only on one crisis. So the particularity of the system of the center is that we combine executive education with facilitation. We also serve as an incubator, and all these different facets of the center, they reinforce themselves. And this is also the first place where officials from North Korea can meet officers from the US, where the Chinese military will be sitting next to someone from Amnesty International, and where we have a representative of NGOs sitting next to a representative from the defense industry. So really something that use and is located in Geneva, in neutral Switzerland, a large ecosystem, and this is what we do at the centers. And the motto of the center, now we conclude by this, is don't fight the problem, shape the solution. Don't fight the problem, shape the solution. Thank you very much, and now I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Ambassador, that was fantastic. Thank you very much for speaking. If I could start, I have know through personal experience that the Geneva Center runs a fantastic event called Cyber 912, which helps supports a lot of technical talent and that intersectionality between policy and technical thinking, as well as the agility that's required in these more technical spaces. I'm curious to your thoughts as to how, when you take those new up and coming leaders that those kind of events are fostering, how do you make sure that when they integrate into our existing structures of government where the leaders might have, as you said, their heads a bit more down, how to ensure that they're able to support their ideas and not sort of get burnt out of the industry quickly just because they're trying these new technical solutions while the existing leadership is just sort of steaming ahead with what they're already doing.
Thank you for your question, Matthew. What is fascinating in this competition, Cyber 12, is that this year we'll run the Cyber 12 fully virtual, and we have more than 20 teams coming from all over Europe, the US, and other parts of the world, is to see the imagination, the creativity of these not so young people, because they're all master's degree or doing their master's degree or doing their PhDs. And sometimes they bring solutions that the people in institution will never have thought of. If you work in an institution, taking risk is not something that is going to be rewarded. If you're creative enough, if you're creative and so on, it's not something that makes you really make the spectacular career. So for us, it's important to have what we call also reverse mentoring. A mentor is someone who knows more and will support, foster, encourage someone in the past, on a career, or in front of difficulties. But reverse mentoring and have a younger generation explaining to the older one how a social media is functioning. Slack, Trello, whatever, is something that my generation, I started my first posting as a young attaché in Prague as a diplomat. We had no emails, only one computer for all the embassy, and I have to let the ambassador take it, and we receive papers from diplomatic career. Now we coordinate positions in multilateral setting via WhatsApp. So this is the two-way exchange. This is what's critical. Two-way exchange, because diversity, the more diverse a team, the better the team is in developing solutions that are key to face all the challenge we have.
Thank you very much. If any of the other committee members would like to jump in with a question, please feel free.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for that fascinating talk. You mentioned just now the importance of diversity, and I think that that's of course true when we have a diversity of people, we have a diversity of thought represented, and we get better solutions. Unfortunately, in most major organizations around the world, governments and otherwise, that diversity in leadership is rarely reflected. An example of that could be gender ratios or a diversity of different ethnic backgrounds. I'm wondering what you think can be done to speed up that process, since it doesn't appear to be happening very quickly at the time being. And these solutions are, as you mentioned, the need for flexibility and adaptability, a rapid reaction is so important. So how do we kind of overcome that bureaucratic inertia that exists and see that diversity represented?
Thank you very much for your question, because it's key. As I mentioned before, without diversity, we'll have not the creativity necessary, and we'll not use all the right people at the right position and all what they have to offer. And there is a movement that's been created in Geneva called the Gender Champions. So I'm a gender champion, for example. That means that every year I put myself three objectives. I will never sit in a panel with only male. I will make sure that the gender, that the diversity, and that also everyone avoid bias in the things. Because I'm convinced that this diversity is an enormous force multiplier. But we have to show by the example. I take another example on this. Prior to the coronavirus, a lot of organizations were not keen on letting their employees work from home. Now we see that everybody can work from home. We probably in the future will be working more from home. Our organization, we had at GCSP the possibility to have 2 days a week home. And people said, wow, 2 days a week home, but how do you trust these people? Do you think they work at home? But because we changed the mindset. I'm not leading a group of experts at the center. I'm leading a group of entrepreneurs. We covered 19 topics, from cybersecurity to crisis management to gender to peace building to arms control. And at the helm of each of these elements, we have an entrepreneur. People said, but not so possible, Yeah, I transform a military officer in an entrepreneur. It's not easy, but you have to show up. So the gender champion movement. And now we have more than 300 gender champions, from Mr. Guterres, the Secretary General of the UN, to a lot of head of missions, head of international organizations, and to make sure that there is also peer pressure. Either it's a top-down or it's a peer pressure, but you have to show that it's good. And in the future, it's not with the advance of artificial intelligence, robotics, and so on, IQ will be less important than EQ. Intellectual quotient will be less important than emotional quotient. And soft skills will be renamed. It will be called robot-proof skills. There is a lot. And if we make the different, let's say, girls learn more coding, but also for boys to understand more empathy. And so you have to do it, but you have to prove it, you have to show it, you have to test it, experiment it. And the robot-proof skills, I read that in a few years ago in an article in the Financial Times. I don't know who, it was a woman who wrote it, but it's really true. There are hard skills, soft skills, but there are skills that are more important in the future, as our way of working will be spectacularly influenced by technology. Thank you for your question, because I really believe that we have to make a huge effort, but it will be an effort that will have a lot of good deeds and a lot of good impact on all what we do.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us, Ambassador. I had a question regarding the current crisis as well. Has your experience had any other impacts on how you view what you do at your center, how you approach it, and what it's important to emphasize, say, in education, for example?
With the current crisis, as I mentioned at the beginning, the trends that existed before are not going to change. The trends that we have seen from geopolitics, on the convergence, the interdependence, the speed, the vulnerability, all these are going to be accelerated by the coronavirus. So it will affect us as individuals, the way we go to work, the way how far we work, we live from work, how we work, but also in organization. For us, is to be as a foundation, is to be able, and this is what the donor expects, to be able to deliver on the mission. Our mission is the promotion of peace, security, international cooperation through different tracks. But if we are not able to do it, the donors will stop funding. So for us, is really the ability to be agile enough to transform a cause that is face-to-face into something that is fully virtual, and within the platform have virtual breakout groups, basically that. It affects also all the negotiation track 1.5 we do with officials of countries and experts on countries and regions like Syria. Last week, we had more than 70 people attending a fully virtual 2-day track 1.5 meeting on the crisis in Syria. We have people from Iran, Turkey, Syria, the US, European Union, and we'll all be able to work at it. So for us, it's something new, but the trends are moving so fast that we cannot stay idle and say, okay, we have been working like that. This is the way we do diplomacy. This is the way we organize our things. No, we have to change. But this is why the learning agility is to make sure that you can go from a situation that is normal, have a big shock, and this new normal continue to work and perform. So you have to deliver and perform. You have to perform and transform the organization at the same time. And will be all the time as we move forward.
Hi, thanks for the talk. That was really interesting. I wondered if you have some thoughts on how securitization of issues can either stifle or lead to more innovation, whether taking stuff out of normal policy realms can make innovation more helpful, or how it creates like a certain mindset in terms of how problems are attacked.
You mean the securitization of issues? Or okay,
so for example, like coronavirus, would securitizing that create a mindset that isn't helpful in creating innovation, or would it allow more freedom for innovation to come about?
if you see now this coronavirus, you have a two-way street here. We have on one way the coronavirus who is spreading fast, but also the fact that it's spreading fast through globalization and transportation and exchange of ideas mean also that the knowledge and exchange of ideas travel very fast. This is something that is very positive. And never before has so many scientists, medical doctors, donors, government work together to find a solution. And I hope that we find quickly a vaccine that will become a common good and not the start of a competition between whose countries has developed it, whether they put IPs on the product and then move forward. So it's a test also of multilateralism. It's to see how countries will use it. Biological weapons, we see that in US with a lot of focus on this, less on preparing for the pandemic, but more on focusing on bioweapons. How different governments will prioritize within their countries the different issues, because all the issues are there. You can either theorize them, see everything through the eye, through the length of security, or you can take another approach. But each government will be also reflective on what their own interest, what is the interest of the electorate, what is the vision of the country for the next 15 to 10 years. This is quite a complex problem, and in the longer talk, just to look at all what could came out of it.
Well, excellent. Ambassador, thank you very much for your time. We want to be cognizant about not taking up too much of it. I really appreciate you taking the time to come speak to us today. I imagine it's a very busy time for somebody who specializes in crisis management at the moment. But yeah, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, all of us. Thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure talking to you, and the best to all of you.